In recent years, the dream of traveling to the US has gradually been overshadowed by growing frustration and disappointment from international travelers. While the US used to symbolize adventure, luxury, and opportunity, visitors from Canada, Europe, and Mexico now find exploring all the country has to offer increasingly difficult and expensive. Hidden fees, complicated travel regulations, and cumbersome customs procedures have left many feeling unwelcome. This shift in sentiment has raised eyebrows and sparked intense discussions globally. Join us as we explore the 7 main reasons why international travelers are rethinking their trips to the US, and what this means for the country's once thriving tourism industry. Stay tuned. This isn't just about money. It's about the experience and how it's changing in troubling ways. If you agree with these reasons, don't forget to leave a 1 in the comments. If you think otherwise, leave a 0 to let us know your opinion. Be sure to like and subscribe to support our channel. The United States was once the symbol of the American dream, a dream destination for those wanting to explore the world, experience diverse cultures, and seek life-changing opportunities. However, that dream seems to be fading, turning into an uncomfortable reality for many international visitors. From unexpected fees to cumbersome administrative procedures, the transformation in the U.S. tourism industry is a cautionary tale not just for tourists, but also for the country's travel sector. First, let's look at the costs. Traveling to the U.S. is now not only expensive due to publicly disclosed fees, but also because of hidden costs that continue to rise. If you want to fly to the U.S., don't forget that your ticket might come with additional charges for luggage, seat selection, or even meals on the plane. This not only increases the cost of travel, but also frustrates many visitors who feel forced to pay for things that should be basic services. And if you think hotels are where you can relax after a long flight, be prepared for the increasingly steep resort fees. These charges may not be clearly communicated up front, making tourists feel tricked when their final bill turns out to be much higher than expected. In addition, customs procedures are another factor that exhausts travelers when they arrive in the U.S. Complicated regulations and procedures are making tourists' trips more stressful and no longer as easy as before. Long queues, meticulous luggage checks, and strict questioning at the border make many people feel scrutinized, even unwelcome. This particularly affects tourists from Canada, Europe, and Mexico, where relations between the countries have traditionally been good and convenient. In fact, international tourist spending in the U.S. has dropped by 7% this year, a concerning figure for the country's tourism industry. This decline is not only a result of rising costs, but also the effect of the difficult policies and regulations that travelers face. Many tourists from Canada, Europe, and Mexico are turning away from the U.S., choosing other destinations like Asia, Europe, or nearby countries in the region, where travel costs are more reasonable and procedures easier. The reasons for many people turning away from the U.S. can be explained by 7 key factors. First are the hidden fees that travelers face throughout their journey. Next, the complicated customs procedures and security regulations strip away the comfort tourists expect when coming to the U.S. Moreover, with unstable political decisions and changing tax policies, traveling to the U.S. is no longer an attractive option for many. These factors create an unfriendly environment for tourists, making them feel disrespected and unable to enjoy their vacations. A key lesson to be learned from the current state of U.S. tourism is the need to improve tourism policies, from making costs transparent to simplifying customs procedures. If the U.S. wants to maintain its position as one of the world's top tourist destinations, there needs to be a shift in how tourists are treated. This would not only help reduce unreasonable fees, but also create a more welcoming and accessible environment for international visitors. Another lesson is the influence of politics on the tourism industry. Tax policies and legal changes can have a significant impact on tourists' decisions when choosing their destinations. The government must recognize that tourism is not just an economic sector, but an important part of building the national image. A country cannot thrive in tourism if it does not create an easy and comfortable environment for international visitors. The U.S. must understand that in the age of globalization, travelers can choose any country to visit, and if the difficulties in U.S. tourism are not addressed in time, other countries will be ready to seize this market share. Once tourists feel unfairly treated or taken advantage of, they will not hesitate to seek out other destinations where they feel more comfortable and respected. Finally, the changes in the U.S. tourism situation not only reflect a decline in the number of visitors, but also serve as a wake-up call about how a country faces economic and political challenges. The tourism industry is an essential part of a nation's development, and maintaining its appeal to international tourists requires continuous effort to improve the tourism environment while protecting tourists' rights and simplifying administrative processes and policies. What is happening in the U.S. is a lesson for all countries to carefully consider the balance between short-term economic benefits and building a sustainable, friendly, and expanding tourism sector. Traveling to the United States is no longer just a leisurely vacation. It has become a form of short-term consumer debt. In the past, a round-trip flight from Toronto to Florida was as affordable as buying a rice cooker from Walmart. But now, the price of a plane ticket is equivalent to purchasing a flat-screen TV. And that's just the airfare. If you think the cost ends with the plane ticket, you are mistaken. In reality, everything has increased in price, from hotels to dining services, making a vacation in the U.S. no longer a reasonable option for many international tourists. This phenomenon, known as price shock, is a jarring increase in costs that directly impacts travelers' wallets. Price shock is not only about sudden price hikes, but also the lack of transparency in the additional fees that tourists are expected to pay. Many travelers have complained that they were overcharged at popular tourist destinations. Resort fees, service charges, parking fees, and hidden consumption costs increase the overall price of a trip to the U.S., making tourism less appealing than ever before. According to a recent report by the World Travel and Tourism Council, international tourist spending in the U.S. is expected to decrease by 7% in 2025, equivalent to a loss of around $2.5 billion. While these numbers may seem abstract, they reflect a worrying reality for the U.S. tourism industry. The effects of this decline are not limited to large travel companies, but also extend to millions of workers in the service sector. From bartenders at Las Vegas casinos to tour guides in New York and employees in the hospitality industry, all are facing a significant loss in income. Around 100,000 jobs in the service sector could be lost, creating a shock to the local economies of many major cities across the U.S. The U.S. tourism industry, once one of the largest revenue generators for the country, now faces severe challenges. As travel costs become prohibitive, many international tourists will opt for other destinations where they can get better value for their money. This will not only harm tourism businesses, but also affect the workers in cities that rely on international tourism to sustain their economies. The impact of rising costs goes beyond the tourists themselves and affects the image of the U.S. as an attractive tourist destination. In today's globalized world, travelers have more choices than ever before. And when factors such as high costs, complex procedures, and hidden fees continue to rise, it will be difficult for the U.S. to maintain its position in the hearts of international tourists. Other countries with lower costs and easier procedures will become more appealing alternatives. The lesson here is clear. If the U.S. doesn't quickly adjust its pricing policies and administrative procedures, the tourism industry will face a difficult future. International tourists will no longer choose the U.S. if they feel taken advantage of by unreasonable fees and cumbersome processes. To maintain its attractiveness, the U.S. needs to reduce hidden costs, clarify fees up front, and improve the travel experience for tourists. This will not only help the tourism economy grow, but also protect the service industries that are struggling with the downturn. The U.S. must recognize that tourism is not only an important economic sector, but also a key part of its national image-building strategy. Tourism not only drives economic growth, but also serves as a powerful tool for promoting culture, creating jobs, and attracting investment. Therefore, if pricing policies do not change, the U.S. tourism industry may lose its competitiveness and fail to attract international tourists in the future. As travel costs to the United States continue to rise, many international tourists, especially from Canada, are beginning to feel the financial burden. A recent report reveals that, in just a few months, bookings from Canada to the U.S. have dropped by more than 35%. This shift not only reflects a change in travel preferences, but also a significant shift in the purchasing power of tourists. So why are tourists choosing to leave the US and head to other destinations? Simply put, everything is adding up. A flight from Canada to the US is no longer just expensive due to the ticket price, but also due to the numerous additional fees. Luggage fees, seat selection charges, and especially hotel service fees, even at a budget motel, significantly raise the overall cost of the trip. Even something as simple as a meal can cost an additional 20% in tips, not because the tourists are particularly generous, but because it's automatically added to the bill. Given this situation, US tourism is gradually becoming an unappealing option for many travelers, especially those from countries with lower living standards like Canada. For example, a person living in Toronto who used to drive to Florida every winter to escape the harsh cold had to cancel their trip this year simply because of the high costs. When they tried to book tickets for their family of 4, the total cost increased by $600 due to hidden fees and taxes they were unaware of. As a result, they chose Cuba as an alternative destination, where the costs were much lower and they could still enjoy their vacation. In fact, a one-week all-inclusive vacation in Varadero, Cuba, is now cheaper than a weekend getaway in Miami. This clearly illustrates the cost disparity between the US and other destinations, especially when tourists now have many alternative options. Cuba, with its affordable prices and no hidden fees, has become an attractive destination, even for families that were accustomed to visiting the US. As the cost of US travel continues to climb, many tourists are turning away from the country and seeking more reasonably priced destinations. These changes not only affect tourists, but also directly impact the local economy in the US, particularly in large cities that rely heavily on international tourism. Local businesses, from restaurants to hotels, will face significant declines in revenue. Those working in the service industry, who depend on international tourists, will bear the brunt of the damage. The key lesson here is that the US tourism industry needs to adjust its pricing policies and taxes to retain tourists. If not, many travelers will continue to search for more affordable destinations, which will severely damage the US tourism economy. The government and US tourism businesses need to reconsider hidden fees and find ways to simplify administrative procedures while offering more transparent and reasonable travel options for international tourists. Moreover, this lesson serves as a reminder for other countries about the importance of maintaining reasonable costs in the tourism industry. Travel policies should carefully balance economic benefits with the comfort of tourists. While increasing hidden fees and taxes may bring short-term revenue, in the long run, it will diminish the appeal of a country like the US in the eyes of international travelers. Remember, in a competitive world, tourists can easily find other destinations that are more affordable and offer a more enjoyable experience. The United States, once the bustling consumer paradise where supermarkets are always lit, stores open 24/7, and Las Vegas never sleeps, has long been a dream destination for tourists worldwide. However, that image is gradually changing, and the current reality brings with it a bitter truth. This paradise no longer attracts international tourists as it once did, as they begin to opt for destinations with more reasonable costs and fewer hassles. As European tourists start heading to Turkey, Mexicans look for vacations in Japan or Spain, and Canadians choose direct flights to Caribbean destinations. The US is no longer the only appealing destination. Factors such as high costs, complicated administrative procedures, and stringent security regulations have made many tourists feel unwelcome, prompting them to find better alternatives in other countries. The bitterest truth is that even ordinary Americans are facing rising costs. With the decline in international tourists, hotels and restaurants in major cities must compensate for this shortfall by raising their service prices. This creates a vicious cycle. When international tourists don't come, locals end up shouldering higher costs to keep the tourism industry and related services running. As a result, domestic travel is now as expensive as buying a used car. Domestic flights are no longer as cheap as they once were, and additional services, from luggage to meals, have surged in price. Each trip to the airport feels like a gamble. Will the flight be delayed? How much will baggage fees add to the cost? Will the fast food meal from the airport vendor actually be enough to fill you up? Or will it be just a sandwich that leaves you still hungry? This reality is a direct consequence of the increasingly strict political policies and security controls in place in the U.S. While security checks at airports are necessary to ensure national safety, they cause inconvenience and lengthen the waiting time for travelers. These procedures not only create stress for tourists, but also contribute to the rising costs of trips, from additional luggage fees to other service charges that were once unthinkable. Moreover, the U.S. tax policies and travel regulations are also contributing to the country's decreasing competitiveness on the global tourism map. Other countries, such as Turkey, Japan, and Caribbean destinations, have adapted to meet tourists' needs and adjusted their policies to keep visitors coming. In contrast, the U.S. has not made significant changes to revitalize its tourism industry. The lesson here is clear. If the U.S. does not change its approach to the tourism industry, not only will international tourists turn away, but even American citizens may also abandon domestic travel. The government needs to reassess tax policies, reduce administrative procedures, and create a more welcoming environment for tourists. The U.S. must make tourism an attractive and accessible choice again, not just to draw international tourists, but also to serve the domestic travel needs of its own citizens. Additionally, improving the experience at airports and tourist destinations is crucial. Airports need to reduce waiting times and eliminate unreasonable fees. Without these changes, the U.S. will face a bleak tourism future, with both tourists and locals enduring high prices and frustrating administrative procedures. One of the main concerns for international visitors to the United States is the stressful experience at border checkpoints, where travelers not only face hidden fees, but also rigorous immigration procedures that strip away their sense of security. In fact, many people feel like they are participating in a game show when stepping into U.S. airports. A friend of mine once said half-jokingly, "Going to the U.S. now feels like entering a game show. The rules are simple. You walk into the airport, go through customs, and hope you guess the right question. The prize is a passport stamp. If you fail, you might wait for hours or even days in the waiting area without any consolation prize." While this may sound humorous, the reality is very serious. Nowadays, many international visitors report that entering the U.S. is no longer a simple task, but rather a nerve-wracking experience. Every traveler faces intense questioning from customs officers, where everything from phones and laptops to social media accounts is thoroughly scrutinized. Numerous travelers have shared how they feel monitored and investigated without knowing why, simply because they are entering the country. The situation becomes even more serious when certain countries, particularly European ones, face changes in U.S. entry regulations. Travelers from these countries, who once used the STA, Electronic System for Travel Authorization, for quick and convenient entry, are now stripped of this privilege and must apply for a full visa through a far more complicated process. For example, travelers from Europe to Cuba can no longer use ESTA and must undergo the lengthy visa process, which requires significant time and effort. This heightened tension not only annoys travelers, but also damages the U.S.'s image as a friendly, accessible, and open destination for international visitors. When a country enforces excessive security measures that make tourists feel like potential criminals, it creates an invisible barrier between travelers and the U.S., making them reconsider their decision to visit. The worrying aspect is that these security regulations and immigration procedures are becoming more complex and strict, while international tourists are increasingly seeking destinations that are easier and more welcoming. Countries like those in the European Union, Japan, and Latin America have made reforms to simplify entry procedures and reduce excessive controls. This has made these countries more attractive to international tourists, especially when they can easily access them without facing long delays and cumbersome procedures. The lesson here is clear. The U.S. needs to reassess its security measures and immigration procedures. While security is crucial to ensuring the safety of the nation, if regulations and procedures make tourists feel unwelcome and violate their privacy, they will undoubtedly have a negative impact on the tourism industry and the U.S. economy. The U.S. needs to strike a balance between national security and creating a friendly, convenient environment for international visitors. A more open entry policy with a simple and fast process will not only help the U.S. attract international tourists, but also enhance its national image, making tourists feel at ease when choosing the U.S. as their vacation destination. When international tourists stop visiting the U.S., the effects extend beyond just tourism businesses, spreading throughout the economy and directly affecting local communities. One of the most noticeable consequences is that hotels and restaurants are forced to raise prices to compensate for the loss of international visitors. However, it is the everyday Americans who bear the full weight of these wall-building fees. Without international tourists, these businesses try to maintain their profits by increasing costs, and naturally, domestic consumers are the ones who pay. Ordinary workers and families will feel the price hikes in their daily services, from dining out at restaurants to staying in hotels, from short vacations to business trips. It's like a vicious cycle. When international visitors no longer come, this revenue shortfall is placed on the shoulders of local residents, driving up the cost of living while the quality of services declines. It's not just about the cost. When international visitors are absent, major cities will see a drop in tourism-related revenue. This is a crucial income stream not only for the service industries, but also for the budgets of cities and states. Tourism tax revenue helps improve infrastructure, maintain public services, and fund community development projects. When this revenue is cut, cities will face budget shortfalls, leading to cuts in infrastructure spending and public services. The consequence is that not only will tourists suffer, but local residents will also experience reduced service quality and higher costs. Cities may have to scale back public services like public transportation, cultural and entertainment activities, or even the maintenance of public facilities. This not only impacts the quality of life for residents, but also reduces the city's appeal to both international tourists and its own population. Moreover, the decline in tourism also results in the loss of an important source of employment for millions of workers. Workers in the restaurant, hotel, tourism, and transportation industries will face unemployment or reduced wages as businesses scale back operations. This creates a cycle of poverty, where workers have unstable incomes and limited spending power, which further impacts small businesses in the community. The lesson here from the decline in tourism is the importance of maintaining a welcoming and attractive environment for international tourists. Without improvements in tourism policies and a reduction in barriers for visitors, the U.S. will continue to see a decrease in tourism revenue, which will severely affect local communities, the economy, and the quality of life for residents. The U.S. needs to act quickly to restore and sustain the tourism industry as a cornerstone of the economy, not only to serve international visitors, but also to protect the interests of local citizens and communities. The United States is not only facing a decline in international visitors, but this issue has far-reaching effects that directly impact the economy and the lives of its citizens. Tourists from Mexico, who once frequently visited the U.S., are among those suffering as they face barriers due to policies and entry procedures. But it is not just them who pay the price. We, the everyday Americans, are the ones who ultimately bear the brunt of this decline. When the tourism industry loses international guests, the service sector and other industries dependent on tourism also face crisis. Job losses, rising prices, and declining service quality are all contributing to a negative cycle that, in the end, local residents must shoulder. Communities in major cities will face budget cuts for infrastructure, public services, and employment. This not only affects local citizens, but also diminishes the U.S.'s appeal in the eyes of international tourists. We are not only losing tourists, but we are also losing the competitiveness and attractiveness of a country that was once a global leader in tourism. If nothing changes, the U.S. will continue to fall behind, while other countries will continue to grow and thrive due to their more welcoming and tourist-friendly policies. The call to action is clear. The government and relevant agencies need to reform tourism policies, reduce bureaucratic procedures, simplify entry processes, and reconsider the hidden fees that both tourists and locals are burdened with. This is not only necessary to restore the tourism industry, but also to protect the economy and ensure that ordinary Americans do not pay the price for the loss of tourism revenue. Leave a comment below this video. What do you think about the current state of tourism in the U.S.? Are these changes a sign of a major shift in the future? We would love to hear your thoughts.